In the heart of Atlanta's southern suburbs, nestled between well-trimmed lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs, stood New Faith Ministries, a brick church with a tall white steeple that reached toward the sky. On Sundays, the parking lot overflowed. Families in their finest filled the pews, and every voice sang louder when Pastor Malcolm Granger took the pulpit. He was young for a senior pastor, only 42, but his charisma was magnetic. His voice commanded attention, not through fire and brimstone, but with charm, gentleness, and confidence. People came from other churches just to hear him preach. And when he brought his wife Camille and their 3 children on stage, the congregation beamed. They looked like the perfect family, glowing with faith, love, and unity. Camille was known in the community for her poise and kindness. She volunteered at the shelter, hosted Bible studies in their home, and never missed a chance to support Malcolm's vision. Their teenage son Marcus played drums in the youth band, while the younger daughters, Ava and Naomi, were stars of the children's choir. To outsiders, they were untouchable, a model of Christian success. But sometimes, perfect images are built to hide the cracks. And no one could see the ones forming behind the walls of the Granger home. A change in Malcolm's behavior began subtly. He started staying later at church during the week. Meetings, he said. Outreach planning. Then came the text messages he never explained and the mysterious phone calls he took outside. Camille, who once sat front row every Sunday, began taking the kids to a different service time. She stopped smiling as much. People whispered. Something had shifted, though no one dared question their pastor. And then came Denise Hargrove. Denise was the new choir director, a recent hire brought on to lead the growing music ministry. She was in her 30s, recently divorced, with a strong voice and striking beauty. Where Camille was reserved, Denise was fiery. Her voice could fill the sanctuary, and her confidence drew attention, especially Malcolm's. At first, no one thought much of it. She was talented, passionate, friendly. But then she started appearing in places Camille used to be. She sat in Malcolm's office for long music meetings. They stood too close during rehearsals. And some noticed that Malcolm's sermons became different. He talked less about family, more about freedom. Less about commitment, more about temptation. Still, there was no proof. Nothing to accuse him of. Just glimpses and rumors, and the natural desire to believe the best of a man of God. Camille, however, saw the truth. She didn't have all the evidence, but she had a gut feeling that wouldn't go away. Malcolm was slipping away from her, piece by piece, day by day. She tried to save the marriage. Counseling was mentioned. He refused. She prayed more. He prayed less. One night, she searched his phone when he was asleep. What she found confirmed everything: messages. To Denise, full of affection and longing. That was when something in Camille broke. But it wasn't just Camille who had reached a breaking point. So had Malcolm. And what he was planning next would shatter everything. Denise Hargrove had never been one to settle for second place. After her bitter divorce from a prominent lawyer in Savannah, she had moved to Atlanta looking for a fresh start. She had always been drawn to the church, first for solace, then for strategy. With her voice and her charm, she quickly earned the respect of the New Faith Ministries congregation. But what she truly wanted was power, and Pastor Malcolm Granger had it. He had the pulpit, the influence, the adoration. And, eventually, he had her. Their affair began quietly. A late-night call about a new choir arrangement. A shared laugh that lingered too long. A touch on the arm that wasn't entirely innocent. Then came the meetings after hours, doors locked, lights dimmed. What started as temptation quickly turned into obsession. Denise told herself Malcolm was different. He wasn't like her ex, he listened, he needed her. He said he was stuck in a loveless marriage, just going through the motions for the sake of the children. She believed him. Or maybe she wanted to. Malcolm, for all his outward confidence, was unraveling. He had built his identity around being the perfect pastor, the perfect husband, the perfect father. But he had never been good at limits. Denise made him feel alive in a way the ministry no longer did. With her, there was no pressure to perform, no expectations of holiness. She saw him not as a leader, but as a man. And that was something he hadn't felt in years. But their stolen moments weren't enough. The secrecy exhausted him. The risk thrilled him. And eventually, the fantasy overtook reality. Camille, meanwhile, wasn't blind. She noticed the lies, the emotional distance, the guilt masked as distraction. She confronted him, once, in private, but Malcolm dismissed it. Told her she was imagining things. Blamed stress, work, even her own paranoia. She wanted to believe him, but she knew what was happening. And she wasn't the only one. Some of the church staff began to talk. A deacon's wife claimed she saw Malcolm and Denise leaving the church office together late at night. A youth volunteer said they had overheard laughter coming from behind closed doors long after everyone else had gone home. There was nothing solid, just smoke, but it was getting harder to ignore. Denise began to push Malcolm to make a decision. He had promised her they'd be together, promised her a life beyond whispers and shadows. But weeks turned into months, and Camille remained. Frustrated, Denise gave him an ultimatum. She couldn't be the other woman forever. Malcolm assured her it was coming, that he was just waiting for the right moment. But Malcolm wasn't planning a divorce. He wasn't preparing to start a new life the honest way. Something darker had taken hold. A twisted conviction that the only way forward was through blood. He believed he could erase his past, cleanse his sins, and begin again with Denise. He didn't pray for guidance. He planned for silence. It was a warm Saturday evening when everything fell apart. The Granger family was expected to attend a weekend church retreat out in the Blue Ridge Mountains, something they'd done every year without fail. Camille had packed the kids' bags and left their overnight things by the door. Marcus had even posted on his social media about looking forward to hiking. But the next morning, the family was nowhere to be found. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe they left early. Maybe their phone signals were weak in the mountains. But as the hours passed, unease crept in. By Sunday night, the church staff grew concerned when Malcolm failed to show up for his own sermon. On Monday morning, a neighbor noticed the lights in the Granger home had been on for 2 days straight. The family's van sat untouched in the driveway. The mail had begun to pile up. Finally, a concerned deacon requested a wellness check. 2 patrol officers arrived just before noon. They knocked. No answer. They tried calling out. Still nothing. One officer walked around back and noticed the sliding glass door was slightly open. When they stepped inside, the air was still and heavy. Nothing looked out of place, at first. But when they entered the master bedroom, everything changed. Camille was found lying in bed, her body soaked in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times, her face twisted in what looked like confusion more than fear. In the hallway, the door to Marcus's bedroom was open. He was found under his blanket, a single gunshot wound to the head. There were no signs of struggle. It looked as if he'd been killed in his sleep. The 2 younger girls, Ava and Naomi, were found in the upstairs bathroom. Both were fully clothed, their bodies submerged in a tub filled with cold water. The scene was chilling in its precision. There were no broken windows, no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. But Malcolm Granger was gone. News of the murders spread rapidly. Local headlines screamed of tragedy. Church members gathered in shock and disbelief. A prayer vigil was held outside the church, candles lit in remembrance of the family many had admired for years. Some wept openly. Others simply stared at the church steps, asking how something so horrifying could happen to people so loved. But even in those first hours of grief, one question lingered louder than the others: where was Pastor Malcolm? His disappearance raised immediate suspicions. Investigators searched his office, his digital devices, his bank records. What they found was troubling. His last sermon notes had been deleted. A sizable withdrawal had been made from a shared account just 2 days before the murders. His phone had been turned off the night the killings occurred. And surveillance footage from a gas station off I-75 showed him filling his car alone just after midnight, hours after his family was already dead. The perfect image had shattered. Malcolm wasn't a victim. He was on the run. The manhunt for Malcolm Granger exploded across Georgia. His face was plastered on every news station, every highway sign, every social media feed. The community that once praised him now searched for him with suspicion and fear. How could a man who preached about forgiveness and faith murder his wife and 3 children in cold blood? And if he had truly done it, where was he hiding, and who might be helping him? Investigators began piecing together his movements in the hours after the killings. He had used a stolen ID to check into a cheap roadside motel under a false name. There, security cameras caught him with Denise Hargrove, the choir director whose name was already whispered in connection to the scandal. She was seen walking beside him, dressed casually, wheeling a small suitcase. They looked calm, almost relaxed. Denise appeared completely unaware of the horror that had unfolded hours before. When the footage surfaced, authorities brought her in for questioning. She was shaken and tearful, insisting she had no idea what Malcolm had done. According to her, he told her that Camille had taken the children to visit family in Florida, and that their relationship was finally over. Denise admitted they had talked about leaving Atlanta, starting over somewhere else. But she swore she never imagined he was capable of violence. Her phone was seized, and what investigators found blurred the lines of her innocence. Text messages between her and Malcolm grew darker in the weeks before the murders. While she never explicitly suggested violence, there were phrases that raised alarms. "You know what you have to do," she wrote one night. "We can't live like this forever." Another read, "She's in the way of everything we've built." Denise tried to explain them away as emotional venting, nothing more than frustration over a delayed divorce. But by then, public opinion had turned. People wanted her charged. Others called for her to disappear. She was released after questioning but left the state within days, citing safety concerns. She never returned to the church. Meanwhile, Malcolm's trail went cold. He had abandoned his car outside Macon and vanished. Some speculated he had crossed state lines. Others believed he might have taken his own life. But 2 weeks later, a sharp-eyed park ranger in rural Tennessee noticed a man sleeping in a truck behind an abandoned barn. The license plate was missing, and the windows were covered with cloth. The man matched Malcolm's description but looked thinner, unshaven, and defeated. When officers surrounded the vehicle, Malcolm didn't resist. He stepped out with his hands up, barefoot, shaking, and silent. Inside the truck were camping supplies, cash, and a handwritten journal. Pages of it were filled with biblical references, torn pieces of sermons, and strange, rambling thoughts about sacrifice, purity, and rebirth. In one chilling line, he had written, "God has stripped me of everything so I can begin again." The reality was far simpler. Malcolm hadn't been reborn. He had destroyed everything. The trial of Malcolm Granger gripped the entire nation. Broadcasts replayed his sermons beside footage of his arrest, creating a haunting contrast between the polished pastor and the man accused of annihilating his own family. Courtrooms filled quickly each day, with lines forming outside hours before proceedings began. Survivors of the congregation sat in silence, clutching tissues, trying to reconcile the face they once trusted with the monstrous details now being revealed under oath. The prosecution laid out a chilling timeline. They argued that Malcolm had premeditated the murders for months, spurred on by the fear of public humiliation, the desire to keep his image intact, and his obsessive need to be with Denise Hargrove without consequence. Evidence included surveillance footage, bank withdrawals, deleted messages, and, most damning of all, Malcolm's own journal. One entry read, "They are the wall between what is and what could be. And walls must fall." The jury listened in stunned silence. The forensic team described how sedatives had been found in the children's systems, meaning Malcolm had drugged them before carrying out the killings. The knife used on Camille had his fingerprints, and his DNA was found on all 3 children. The crime had been committed in cold blood, with no hesitation, no moment of panic or remorse. It was a deliberate, methodical massacre. The courtroom recoiled as photos were shown, each image stripping away the last fragments of the family man persona Malcolm once wore so convincingly. When Denise took the stand, tension filled the room. She appeared fragile, dressed modestly, with trembling hands and reddened eyes. Her voice cracked as she denied knowing about Malcolm's plans. She said she never believed he was capable of such horror. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to suggest she manipulated him, that she played the role of seductress and pushed him toward madness. But ultimately, the jury didn't buy it. Though public opinion remained divided about her role, legally, she walked free. Malcolm did not testify. He sat expressionless throughout the trial, occasionally flipping through a Bible, but never making eye contact with the jury, his attorney, or even Denise. When the verdict was read, guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder, he showed no visible reaction. At sentencing, the judge called him a man who wore the cloak of holiness while harboring the heart of a predator. He was given life without the possibility of parole. New Faith Ministries never reopened. The building was sold, its stained glass windows removed and donated to another church in Texas. The home where the murders occurred was demolished by the city, replaced by a small garden and plaque honoring Camille, Marcus, Ava, and Naomi. To this day, no one in the community speaks Malcolm Granger's name without a chill running down their spine. The story lives on not because of who Malcolm was in public, but because of what he did in secret. It's a grim reminder that evil doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes, it comes wearing a collar, holding a Bible, and preaching love, while hiding death.